It's often the case that an author who finds their book being adapted into a movie ends up hating the final result. It's a natural reaction. A book is something extremely personal, and when someone else gets their hands on it, an author might feel or completely be removed from the project. Filmmaking is a completely different art form after all, but that's not always the case. In this video, I want to explore the cases in which the author ended up loving the movie. In a few cases, they even declared the movie to be better than the book or a more complete version of what they were trying to do. Stephen King is somewhat of a rarefied figure when it comes to adaptations. His work has been adapted to film and television more than 60 times, a figure that's probably only beaten by William Shakespeare at this point. It makes sense, then, that King has a lot to say about those adaptations. Famously, he's disliked many of them, such as Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, Paul Glasser's The Running Man, and his own Maximum Overdrive, which was adapted from a short called Trucks. That's not how he feels about Frank Darabont's adaptation of Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption though. It started off as a novella published in 1982 and was a break from what King was originally known for. This was a realist work of literature as opposed to the horror and supernatural fare that he usually traded in. Darabont had worked with King on one of his dollar deals before. King would grant students and indie filmmakers the permission to adapt one of his short stories for $1 as a way for them to kickstart their careers and get something on their resume. Darabont was just 20 years old when he paid $1 to adapt The Woman in the Room and would work with King on many movies in the future. He would call The Woman in the Room the best of the dollar deals and would later give Darabont permission to make Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption for $5,000. King himself was surprised that Darabont wanted the rights, as he himself, despite being the author, had no idea how his prison novella could be turned into a movie. He never even cashed the $5,000 check, returning it to Darabont with a note that read, quote, "In case you ever need bail money. Love, Steve," end quote. Frank Darabont, of course, is a genius. After sitting on the rights for 5 years, Darabont wrote a screenplay over a period of 2 months. He made some changes here and there, such as how Brooks died, as well as the fate of Tommy and the warden. In some ways, the movie is darker than the source. Now, prison movies weren't exactly box office superstars, and one could argue they still aren't today. But Frank Darabont is a hell of a writer. The script found its way to Castle Rock producer Liz Glotzer, who threatened to leave the company if they didn't make the movie. Rob Reiner, head of Castle Rock, offered Darabont as much as $3 million to let him direct it, but Darabont refused, saying, quote, "You can continue to defer your dreams in exchange for money and, die without ever having done the thing you set out to do," end quote. Reiner respected that and would mentor him on the movie instead. The movie had a slow start in theaters, but after snagging 7 Academy Award nominations, it picked up steam, eventually making $73 million on a $25 million budget and being hailed as one of the best movies ever made. King, unlike with most of his adaptations, was effusive in his praise. In his words, quote, "When I first saw it, I realized he'd made not just one of the best movies ever done for my work, but a potential movie classic. That turned out to be the case," end quote. King and Darabont would collaborate a couple more times on 1999's The Green Mile and 2007's The Mist. All of their collaborations so far have made money and been critically acclaimed. Andy Weir is one of the wildest authorial successes of the 21st century so far. A fan of sci-fi as a kid, he went to college for computer science and would work at AOL, Palm, and Blizzard. He moonlighted as an author at the same time and eventually started making webcomics, which helped him build an audience. His 2009 short story, The Egg, helped get him some recognition, but it was 2011's The Martian that would send him to Hollywood. Weir did a lot of research for this book, which saw a man, Mark Watney, get stranded alone on Mars in 2035. Despite some exaggerations, he strived to be as accurate as possible for the book. He started selling it on the Kindle store for 99 cents, and the book picked up steam and landed on the Kindle bestseller list. He was approached for a book deal with Crown, which then landed on the New York Times bestseller list and won effusive praise from critics. The book was optioned in 2013 by 20th Century Fox, and the adaptation would find its way to Ridley Scott. Now, Ridley Scott is one of the finest directors of all time. Blade Runner and Alien are 2 of the most important sci-fi films of all time, so it makes sense that this book landed with him. He also has a machine-like work ethic and started working on The Martian after rapping on Exodus, Gods and Kings. Matt Damon, meanwhile, was hired to play Mark Watney. When Weir first wrote The Martian, he got an invite from NASA to tour Johnson Space Center and Jet Propulsion Laboratory. When they started working on the movie, he reached out to them to see if they could work with him and Scott on the movie. NASA agreed and several staff helped with the effort. They would answer hundreds of questions to ensure that what could be accurate remained accurate, as well as provided research and photos. This being sci-fi, some liberties were, of course, necessary. Still, NASA hoped that it would spur an interest in the space program and space travel. Apropos of nothing, I think that it had that effect. It certainly stoked a lot of interest in general, considering the movie made $630 million on a $108 million budget, a smashing success. Not only that, it went on to earn multiple Academy Award nominations, including for Best Picture and Best Actor, though of the 7, it won none of them. Perhaps thanks to his close collaboration, as well as helping get NASA on board, Andy Weir turned out to be a huge fan of the movie. Of it, he said, quote, "They did a great job. It's fantastic. Matt Damon just completely nails the character of Watney. He's exactly the way I imagined him," end quote. He was especially a fan of Scott's direction. Of it, Weir said, quote, "One thing that Ridley Scott is actually kind of famous for in a lot of his movies are these grand, sweeping panoramic vistas of the setting. And The Martian is no different. There's beautiful shots of Mars and Martian scenery and terrain. That's something that's really hard to convey in a book. There's only so long you can describe scenery and landscape before the reader throws the book over his shoulder. So it was really nice to see that," end quote. Hollywood is sometimes called the Dream Factory. That was certainly the case for Weir, who said that the movie was like all of his dreams coming true. After she graduated college and backpacked through Europe and Asia, Lauren Weisberger got a gig that many would do uncouth things for, becoming an assistant to Anna Wintour, the legendary editor-in-chief of Vogue and one of the most powerful women in the publishing and fashion industries. However, she wouldn't be there for long. Within 10 months, Weisberger left to work at Departures, the magazine owned by American Express. Despite not spending much time at Vogue, it was still a fast-paced, high-energy job. She had to manage not just her own life, but to ensure that Wintour's life was as smooth as possible so that she could focus on running the magazine. Weisberger was able to leverage that short stint into 2003's The Devil Wears Prada, which is about a young woman, Andy, that gets hired as a personal assistant to a fashion magazine editor, Miranda. Now, this was a book that Hollywood really wanted to adapt. When word reached the town, 20th Century Fox picked up the rights before it was even finished. Carla Hacken, executive vice president at the studio, said, quote, "I thought Miranda Priestley was one of the greatest villains ever. I remember we aggressively went in and scooped it up," end quote. According to Variety, the first 100 pages and a proposal was all the studio had to go on, but Miranda was compelling enough to make it an easy buy. Now, it was pretty much an open secret that Weisberger had based Miranda on Wintour. Some fashion designers refused to collaborate for fear of running afoul of Wintour. Considering that she's pretty well known for being distant and intimidating, I can sort of understand why. Meryl Streep, who was cast as Miranda Priestley, tried to avoid being like her, though comparisons would be inevitable. The tiptoeing around Wintour, though, might have been needless. She was a fan of the movie, especially of Streep's character. In her words, quote, "Anything that makes fashion entertaining and glamorous and interesting is wonderful for our industry," end quote. The movie ended up being a huge hit, turning $327 million on a $41 million budget. For comparison, 2006's Superman Returns, which came out the same week, had a $223 million budget and made $391 million. Critics and the audience both enjoyed it, and the movie has penetrated pop culture in the nearly 20 years since its release. Weisberger was pleased with the final result, saying, quote, "As an author, you don't always love the way your book gets adapted into movie form, but I could not be more happy about it," end quote. She also thought that the movie did better with some things than the book. She noted that the movie version of Miranda was multidimensional compared to the one that she had written. It just goes to show that by changing a small thing, you can both retain the core of the original and deliver something completely new. 2018's Crazy Rich Asians was adapted from the 2013 novel by Kevin Kwan. It's about a Chinese-American woman who learns that her boyfriend is from an extremely wealthy, influential Singaporean family and how the two classes clash. Kwan was able to draw on some of his own experiences. His great-grandfather was a wealthy banker, and one of his other grandfathers was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. He started writing the novel when he was taking care of his father, who had cancer. The family had moved to the United States when Kwan was 11, and he would reminisce with his father about life in the old country. It started as a way to help capture the memories, but would also help him understand his life from a different perspective. The book, like Lauren Weisberger's The Devil Wears Prada, was eagerly anticipated, and the town was quick to try and snatch it up even before it hit shelves. One thing that Kwan immediately found was that everyone wanted to put their own spin on his book. according to a Vulture piece by Chris Lee that chronicled the road to making the movie, quote, "One interested producer proposed a specific change that he felt would make the project more broadly commercial. Would Kwan consider changing the book's protagonist, Rachel Chu, from Chinese American to white?" End quote. But it's not like Kwan was hurting for cash. What mattered more for him was keeping the core of the original intact. That is, he wanted to have complete creative control, which most producers balked at. There were a brave few, however, that were willing to accept such terms. For the right price, of course. That price was $1, and the winning bid went to Color Force. All they needed to do was allow Kwan a deep involvement in production to make sure that the final film aligned with the vision that he laid out in his book. This is where a lot of authors lose control. For whatever reason, they don't stay involved in the process. It's kind of like how many screenwriters write a movie and then move on to the next one, not remaining involved in the rest of the production. To fix this, they didn't seek out studio financing, preferring to partner with Ivanhoe Pictures, a production company that focused on Asian markets. That meant that they would have to agree to make the movie on a smaller budget, but didn't have to deal with a larger studio telling them what they could or couldn't do. That ended up not being an impediment at all. Made on a budget of $30 million, the movie was a solid hit, raking in $239 million at the box office and getting rave reviews. Now, it does remain the case that cinema and literature are two different art forms. Yes, it's obvious, but it bears repeating that even if a writer is deeply involved, some changes will be necessary. Kwan experienced the same, but thinks that the movie is better for it. In his words, quote, "It's been a surreal experience because it's great to be involved, and yet at the same time, you're seeing things evolve in a way that is out of your control, and at a certain point, you have to give it up and say this is a whole new beast, and that it's also not just my vision anymore. The movie is a vision of John Chu, and you have to trust his vision, his eye, and his taste. Thankfully, he has exquisite taste." End quote. Kwan had the kind of success that every author probably dreams of. A critically and commercially successful movie that hewed closely to his vision, only changing when he, as the author, allowed it to. Of course, the author needs to be aware of what can and can't be changed. You can only change so much before you stray too far from the original work. Similar to how Andy Weir started writing his novels when he was working as a programmer, Chuck Palahniuk started writing his books when he was working as a mechanic for Freightliner trucks. The first novel that he tried to get published, Invisible Monsters, was rejected by everyone that he approached. It wouldn't be published until 1999 after his second novel, Fight Club, caused a stir. Palahniuk got the inspiration to write the novel after he got in a fight on a camping trip. His face was swollen and bruised, but he found that his co-workers avoided asking him what exactly had happened. However, the book suffered the fate of many a great book or movie or other work of art. That is, commercial reception was lacking. Sure, he got it published, but the copies weren't flying off the shelves despite praise from critics. Publishers Weekly, for example, got to the heart of it. Quote, "Writing in an iconic deadpan and including something to offend everyone, Palahniuk is a risky writer who takes chances galore, especially with a particularly bizarre plot twist he throws in late in the book. Caustic, outrageous, bleakly funny, violent, and always unsettling, Palahniuk's utterly original creation will make even the most jaded reader sit up and take notice." End quote. But the right people read it. Similar to Kwan and Weisberger, Fox had sent out feelers for material that they could adapt. Interestingly, a first read of the novel led to the studio reader discouraging adapting it. But creative executive Kevin McCormick thought that there was something here and passed the book along to producers Art Linson and Lauren Spender, but they also rejected it. But another pair of producers, Josh Donen and Ross Bell, liked it and staged a reading that they recorded. They sent the recording to Laura Ziskin, head of Fox 2000 Pictures, who bought the rights to the novel from Palahniuk for $10,000. The book passed through the hands of several directors, such as Peter Jackson, Bryan Singer, Danny Boyle, and David O. Russell. Jackson was too busy with another movie, Singer never read it, Boyle decided to pass on it, and Russell just didn't get it. But another David Fincher, expressed interest in making the movie. In fact, he had already tried to purchase the rights, but they had been sold to Fox. Despite his hesitation on working with Fox after a terrible experience on Alien 3, Fincher negotiated a deal with them. The movie had a budget that kept escalating, and while it tripped during its first release, it made bank on its home video sales. Famously, Fox had no idea how to market the movie, and they were never able to figure it out either. The box office disappointment led to studio head Bill Mechanic eventually resigning. And while it's hailed as a classic now, that certainly was not the case when it first came out. It was a pretty polarizing film, and people really did not like the violence in it. Some people thought that it went too far, while others criticized Fox for even making it in the first place. But despite that, this was another case of an author being happy with how the movie version turned out. In fact, Palahniuk thought that the movie might have done a better job than the book in streamlining the plot. In his words, quote, "Now that I see the movie, especially when I sat down with Jim Uhls and recorded a commentary track for the DVD, I was sort of embarrassed of the book because the movie had streamlined the plot and made it so much more effective and made connections that I had never thought to make," end quote. This, it seems, is a case where the author thinks that the movie transcended his own work to an extent. Philip K. Dick was one of the most prolific sci-fi writers of the 20th century. Many of his works, such as The Man in the High Castle, Minority Report, A Scanner Darkly, Paycheck, and more under different names, have been adapted as movies or TV shows. But, without a doubt, the most important and most acclaimed is Blade Runner, adapted from 1968's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Directed by Ridley Scott, written by Hampton Fancher, and starring Harrison Ford, Blade Runner is one of the most important movies ever made, and its influence is seen in most sci-fi that came after it. In it, Ford plays Deckard in a dystopian Los Angeles where his job is to hunt down and retire synthetic humans. PKD himself was not predisposed to liking the movie. He was paranoid and possibly schizophrenic. It didn't help that he had no idea that the movie was even being made in the first place, and after he got a hold of the script, he publicly criticized it. He was also, by default, mistrustful of Hollywood. Such deep-seated disdain isn't exactly the kind of stuff that you can easily get over. Ridley Scott, however, was not Hollywood. In fact, Blade Runner was going to be his first Hollywood production. Scott invited PKD down to Ridleyville, a massive set that they constructed for the movie, and he gave the author a tour and screened some of the special effects for him. Again, Dick was not disposed to liking it. According to David Dreyer, who was working on the special effects for the movie, quote, "He started kind of grilling me in this grouchy tone about all kinds of things. He wanted to know what was going on, told me that he'd been very unhappy with the script, and so on and so forth," end quote. His attitude didn't change until they ran a reel for him, showing him the special effects. When it was over, Dick asked them to run it again. They, of course, acquiesced. After the second screening, Dreyer said that PKD turned to him and said, quote, "How is this possible? How can this be? Those are not the exact images, but have the texture and tone of the images I saw in my head when I was writing the original book. The environment is exactly as how I'd imagined it. How do you guys do that? How did you know what I was feeling and thinking?" End quote. Now, that's coming from a third party, so how can we know that that's what Dick actually thought? Well, this is one of the few cases where, beyond short snippets given during interviews, we have an actual, honest-to-goodness, privately written reaction of the author's opinion of the film version of his work. The following are snippets from a letter that he sent to Jeff Walker, head of marketing for the Ladd Company, on October 11th, 1981. The Ladd Company helped produce and provide financing for the movie. These are fairly lengthy, but there's really no other way to do a writer justice than by quoting them. He started by saying, quote, "Jeff, after looking, and especially after listening to Harrison Ford discuss the film, I came to the conclusion that this indeed is not science fiction. It is not fantasy. It is exactly what Harrison said, futurism. The impact of Blade Runner is simply going to be overwhelming, both on the public and on creative people, and I believe on science fiction as a field. Since I have been writing and selling science fiction works for 30 years, this is a matter of some importance to me. In all candor, I must say that our field has gradually and steadily been deteriorating for the last few years. Nothing that we have done, individually or collectively, matches Blade Runner. This is not escapism, it is super realism, so gritty and detailed and authentic and goddamn convincing that, well, after the segment, I found my normal present-day reality pallid by comparison. What I'm saying is that all of you, collectively, may have created a unique new form of graphic, artistic expression never before seen. And I think Blade Runner is going to revolutionize our conceptions of what science fiction is and more can be," end quote. Then, after calling contemporary sci-fi inbred, derivative, and stale, which are descriptors that we could probably apply to many creative works today, he continued in his praise, saying, quote, "Suddenly, you people have come in, some of the greatest talents currently in existence, and now we have a new life, a new start. As for my own role in the Blade Runner project, I can only say that I did not know that a work of mine, or a set of ideas of mine, could be escalated into such stunning dimensions," end quote. Chew on that for a second. Some of the greatest talents currently in existence. Considering how curmudgeonly he could be, that's not exactly the kind of praise that you would expect. But the anti-penultimate line is probably the most praiseworthy. Dick wrote that, quote, "My life and creative work are justified and completed by Blade Runner," end quote. Now, if that's not the highest praise you could get from the author of a book, I don't know what is. Philip K. Dick, unfortunately, passed away just a few months before the movie opened. Almost everything in his letter turned out to be accurate. Blade Runner is one of the defining movies of the 1980s, one of the greatest sci-fi films ever made, and you see its influence in literally everything. Really, the only thing that he got wrong was at the end of the letter, he predicted that the movie would be a commercial success. It was actually a complete bomb at the box office and got mixed reviews, though in the years since, I'm pretty sure that it's made all of its money back and more through home video sales, and is now regarded as a masterpiece. Having your work adapted can be lucrative, but it can also be a disconcerting experience. Here's something that you spent years on, and now someone else is going to put their spin on it. A lot of people are comfortable with that notion, but just as many, if not more, are not. More authors do seem to dislike adaptations than like them. Still, there are plenty that do. And of those that do, many think that the filmic version is at least as good as their written work. Personally, I separate the book and movie, and often enjoy both for what they do with the medium. I think that's the best way to enjoy adaptations instead of seeking a one-to-one representation. That's just me though. Do you find yourself preferring one medium to the other, or do you enjoy both as well? Let me know.